Good afternoon to you and welcome to the show. My name is Alex MacPhail. Thanks for joining. As you can see, I'm thrilled to be home in my home studio once again, home from quarantine, back with the family. And today I've got a fascinating guest, a guest that I have a lot of time and respect for. I love her. My sister, Nicola MacPhail, joins us with Tales of Adventure. So stay tuned. Good afternoon to you, Nicola, and welcome. How are you doing today in lockdown?
Hi, Al. I'm good, thank you. Or should that be good day since I'm all the way from Brisbane now?
All the way from Brisbane. How's it going there in Brisbane? I know you've recently done a flight. Are you in home quarantine as well?
I am. I was in Hong Kong last week, so that means 14 days at home, which is no bad thing. So I can send my husband out for shopping, and I don't have to do battle with the hordes.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, I'm so thankful and appreciative that you've agreed to join the show. You are the first representation of a lady pilot on the show, so I hope you enjoy that. And I'm looking forward to this conversation that we're going to have. Let's start from the beginning. So we grew up in Cape Town. You finished school in the sort of mid-90s and you dive into studying. Straight away you go for the easiest degree you can think of, a Bachelor of Business Science at UCT. Walk us through the end of your time studying and how you moved off through to the UK.
So I finished up with an honours degree in finance because, of course, every little girl grows up with a burning passion to study numbers and do lots of things with money. I went over to the UK and got a job with an investment bank and spent a couple of years doing very clever investment banking things and then moved on to become a chartered accountant in London.
Okay, great. So just want to clarify that. So you did the investment banking stuff with your degree, and then you re-skilled yourself into a whole new profession in chartered accounting. Was that just a marry-over, or was that something that you had to dig in deep?
There wasn't too much overlap between what I had been doing and chartered accounting, but I was very fortunate that I was actually able to transfer jobs between where I was at in the company, and then a role opened up internally and they gave preference to internal candidates in the accounting/finance department.
Okay.
And I thought that sort of better suited me, so I moved in towards it and did studying in my own time.
Okay, cool. Right. So at the end of this, then you decide you've done several years of study of work in finance, both in Scotland and London. And about now you decide it's time for a bit of an adventure. So you take a bit of time off and travel the world, and I want to put up some pictures here. So the first picture I want to share with you guys is this photo of you standing seemingly on a lake, but I can see you wearing crampons, so there's obviously more to this picture than meets the eye. Tell us through what's going on here. You're in South America somewhere.
Yeah, that's actually the Perito Moreno Glacier in Argentina. It's the reason why I love this photo is that there's actually a shelf that's being stood on with water overlapping it. So it looks like you're standing over a hole, but actually you're being quite well supported by a weight of ice underneath you. And what's interesting about that is that's one of, if not the only glacier in the world that isn't retreating. Obviously through global warming and other effects, the glaciers around the world are retreating at the moment, but that one, and science hasn't explained it yet, isn't. It's absolutely stable.
Okay, well, it looks fascinating one day. But one day when I'm big, I'll get myself down that part of the world too. And on from there, you traveled around lots of wild places, but there's just two more places I want to talk about. You managed to get to a place where not a lot of people have been to, the Galápgos Islands, one of those real heritage sites of the world. And here's a picture of a very big tortoise with his neck sticking out. Tell us about the story of this picture.
Oh, so that's Lonesome George. And what's interesting about him, and I'm glad I got to see him before he died because he's no longer alive now, is that he was famous for being the endling in a species. He was the last Pinta Island tortoise. And unfortunately, he was never able to breed, not even to produce sort of a crossbreed kind of a tortoise. So his line has now unfortunately died. And when he was alive, he was actually functionally extinct.
Okay, all right. So it must have been fascinating to see a one of a kind All right, and then so through South America, Galápgos Island, and obviously, like all excited people in travel, you decided it's now time to head off to Antarctica. So here's another nice shot that you've shared with us, taking up the whole screen. We've got the penguin there in the foreground and the ice sheets in the background. What year was this in Antarctica?
That would have been March of 2007. So the penguins had already hatched, and the babies were losing their sort of baby down, becoming sort of sub-adults, and that's a shot of a Gen 2 penguin.
Okay, looks like
against
fun.
the ice shelf.
And how long did you spend in Antarctica? What is a typical trip there?
Typically, tourists to Antarctica will spend, say, 10 days. It's a 14-day trip, but 2 of those days are taken up on the actual travel from South America down to Antarctica, and then 2 days back in the roughest seas you will ever see in your life.
So not water skiing, ski state 1 or 2 conditions, eh?
Absolutely not.
Okay, all right. So the end of this round the world travel, you've had a great adventure. I mean, there's a lot of people dream about this idea of traveling around the world. You end up back at home, back in Cape Town, and at the time I'm serving as a flying instructor in the Air Force, and we get to meet up again. And now flying tickles your fancy, and that's where you start getting busy. So tell us about your first couple of flights, learning how to fly.
So I think you sort of put me in touch with Koos, who, for people who aren't South African, is the word for uncle, and it's a sort of a form of respect towards your elders. And he took me up for a couple of spins in his little Cessna 152. That's what he had. And I can remember he took me up and was teaching me incipient spins, and I'm not sure why, because I think I'd only had 5 hours in this little aircraft. And I screamed and screamed and screamed, and then he looked at me and said, "Oh yeah, you're not your brother, are you?"
Okay, well, of course, a wonderful gentleman. I hope he's tuning in. Also, another mutual friend, also very fond of Wimkoos. And okay, so that was the start of it, and then you managed to get yourself a position at 43 Air School. I know there's some people from 43 Air School tuning in now. You're a graduate there. You managed to complete your commercial pilot license down in the Eastern Cape at Port Alfred. And at the end of this, becoming a qualified pilot now, with also having the chartered accounting background and the business science finance, you managed to secure a fairly decent job. Let's put it that way. Most people who get their commercial license don't get their first job flying a turbine engine, a King Air. Talk us through those first couple of jobs where you're now part accountant, finance guru, and part pilot at these charter outfits.
Yeah, you're absolutely right when you say that. I think people were more interested in my accounting skills than my piloting skills in those days, and probably rightly so. But I did manage to get myself involved in accounting and finance sort of related functions in these little charter companies, with a promise that I could sit in the right-hand seat of a King Air 200, which was fantastic. But because the other skills were so in demand, I sort of had to give up my weekends to go flying. So I was perpetually working.
Okay. And I know it was a time where you were trying to really just build hours. So you got through a couple of these jobs. Great to get the conversion, a little bit of experience on a King Air, and also understanding the back end. You got involved in a bit of safety as well on these charter outfits. But then you saw an opportunity to fly exclusive flying and be the pilot in command, and that's where Botswana opened up for you. So let's talk about how you got into Botswana. It started off as Sefofane, became Wilderness, and tell us about your Botswana days. In fact, before we do that, let's play a little video clip to just give a bit of a whet the appetite here. So here's a clip of some flying that goes on in Botswana. So there's the main terminal building at Maun, tar runway. That just gives you a sense of what Maun is like. So that got airborne. It's not your video clip, I know, but it's one that I've shared all the credits on the description there. But it's a typical operation out of Maun. Tar runway, get airborne and start routing towards the lodge. So talk about those early days in Maun. Flying 206s, you're in charge and it's your ship.
Yeah, that's right. It's very, very exciting. for a pilot who's just out of 43 air school or just got the commercial license. They don't obviously just throw you into an aeroplane and expect you to know what's going on. You do sort of 50 hours of flight familiarization and familiarization of the area and the aircraft. And you've got to convert your commercial license to a Botswana license as well. So there's a number of steps before they let you loose. You don't just get let loose on the public with absolutely no experience. But yeah, no, I don't know that 50 hours was even enough. I think maybe even 100 hours would have been better.
Sure.
Because you still felt like you were in the deep end on your very first flight. But absolutely super exciting, because you're, as you say, the captain of everything that goes on. You have to refuel your aircraft. You've got to worry about oil levels. You've got to greet the guests. You've got to load the bags. You've got to be their tour guide as well, answer their questions, talk about the Delta. And in a sense, it's a tourism job, not just a piloting job.
Yeah, sure. Well, you've also shared some pictures of that. So I want to put up some of the. So one of the earlier, I know you told me that you encountered elephants as one of the first wildlife that you saw there. But here's a great photo from one of your friends and colleagues there, Graham Skinner. What a great shot. I mean, giraffe and zebra and springbok and wild dog and lion and warthog all in the same shot. So is this a scene that you encountered?
Look, it's not something that you see all the time, but it is very typical of the kind of thing you could find in the Delta. And that's absolutely not photoshopped at all. And I'd just like to give a shout out to Graham Skinner, who's a wonderful wildlife photographer and actually spent many years in the Delta as a tour guide as well as a pilot. But yes, that is like fairly typical of the variety and the richness of the wildlife that you can see if you take a holiday there.
And of course, yeah, that's the real attraction. It's such a rich abundance of wildlife. But just going back to that video clip now, so you get airborne. I mean, let's just imagine the point of view of a very sort of high fare paying passenger. You know, it's people that pay a lot of money to get to this exclusive part of the world. The Okavango Delta is just so rich in wildlife. They arrive at an international airport, either sort of through Kenya or South Africa. They'll get the transfer into Maun. But the next step is, sure, it's a tar runway, it's Maun Airport. You get inside this small little plane, one pilot, the pilot's loading the bags, is topping up the fuel, sort of washing their hands and saying, all right, get in and let's go. And then you get airborne in the tar, you turn out and all of a sudden it's just green and it's dense bush. And so talk through that first bit, you know, how do you share the passion, the excitement with your guests? As you're climbing away, you get to about 1,500 feet and how does the flight go from there?
Well, your days are really busy. And so that first experience of getting airborne as a guest and even as staff members, because we flew staff members out to the camps, because of course there are no roads. It's a sort of a river delta, so there's not paved roads. Flying into these lodges is the only way that you can experience the Delta. And even staff who work for years on camps and things like that would be sort of blown away by how beautiful it was and how there was a sort of a silence as you left Maun and a sort of a half anticipating what's coming and half, oh my goodness, what have I got myself into? Where are we going to go?
Sure. Okay. And also now, so it's wild, it's wilderness. I mean, some flights were short. A lot of the places were fairly close to each other. Some were long. But now, as a pilot now, so let's bring it back into the cockpit for you. So you've done your 50 hours of training and you know, a bit of consolidation after that, feeling comfortable. And after 6 months or so, sure, by then you're feeling good. You're feeling confident and you're enjoying this type of operation. But you get airborne, and at the same time that you're sharing the information and you're sharing the passion, and you can see your guests are having a good time and they're taking photos and videos and trying to ask you questions. As a pilot, I mean, you're on quite a hostile terrain. There's wild animals, there's river delta, there's bush. There's not a whole lot of options. So what are you scanning? What are you keeping yourself abreast of to just make sure that all going well? You're flying a small single-engine piston airplane. Talk us through those kind of thought processes, all the while keeping your guests happy too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, people and bags safely on time has got to be the cornerstone of every pilot's job. sure, you're getting distracted because they're asking you questions and you're trying to shout over this engine, and you're also on the radio to other aircraft. You're trying to work out where they are. You're trying to scan visually for them and listen to their radio calls to work out where they are. There's an awful lot going on, particularly because of the way it was structured. So because it's a very sort of fairly structured tourist environment in terms of when the big airliners land in Maun, they'll drop off the guests, and it's a seamless process. So they walk off a big airliner into your tiny 206, and because they're landing at fixed times, you're leaving at fixed times and arriving at fixed times. So it does make the sort of airspace quite busy, or busier than you'd expect.
Sure.
And so you're doing all that, and then, as you say, you're flying a single and it's a piston, so you're looking for places to go all the time. But once you're comfortable, you kind of know where places are. You kind of know without really having to look too hard. Oh, well, I know that this airstrip is the closest and it's on this heading or towards that direction, or it follows this fence line. So you have this mental map of the Delta in your mind, and a kind of a mental idea of how far the strips are and what you could make, given your height and things like that. So it becomes easier and easier. And it's not quite driving to the shop and buying a newspaper, but I would say you get fairly comfortable. You get close to it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, definitely not. But yeah, like you say, it becomes your bit of a background. You know, what was the longest flight you would do? About an hour or less than that?
Yeah, I think probably half an hour, 45 minutes.
Okay, so you can imagine
the longest,
almost like an extended GF area where you would get very familiar. Certainly when we come flying over Mike November Victor on our way through to Europe, obviously we're very high up, 30 to 40,000 feet, but it all looks kind of the same. You obviously see the pattern of the Delta, but otherwise it all looks the same, and I can just see like a plethora of different strips. But certainly it'll take quite a while to just get comfortable with your terrain, with where you can go, but I'm sure after a while it becomes second nature. If I'm going to this camp, I know on the way I've got 2 or 3 camps. This camp, it's a bit further, and you start sort of doing these mental maps and making these shortcuts in your mind you're able to placate your guests, give them the feedback, Absolutely. Pointing out giraffes and elephants on the way, answering the questions, but keeping track of which lodge is coming up next. Okay, so let me put up this. That's it. Let me put up this a picture then of one of the aircraft that you would have flown into the Delta. So there's the 206, and you can see like very, very lush bush, trees. Not an easy place to just, I mean, should you have any trouble, it's not like you could just put it down anyway. There really has to be areas that are identified to be the place to put an airplane down should you have any trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, you can be very unlucky. Fortunately, when I was there, I didn't have any trouble, and I didn't really know of anybody having a lot of trouble. We did have one, not our company, but at the time when I was flying there, one engine failure after takeoff, and sadly didn't make a clear patch of ground, and unfortunately people were killed and hurt in that accident. So from that point of view, yeah, absolutely, you still have to have your wits about you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, that is an unfortunate story. Let me just put the other video up that you discussed earlier, and here we go. This is the landing side of things. Once again, shared video from the YouTube channel. All the descriptions available. Coming into a typical looking strip. The passengers obviously taking a bit of a side shot there, and this is be the end of the landing and go to the terminal building, as it were, and not much terminal building to speak of, but there is an overland vehicle and 1 or 2 folk around, and then typically there'll be another airplane that may come in and out, and you can see very dusty, arid terrain there. You're in the element, you're baking hot in the sun, and people throwing dust on you, but certainly looks exciting. So talk us through the approach and landing at these strips.
So it's quite interesting when you fly into these strips. There is a procedure, and typically what should happen is that the lodge will send out a game drive vehicle that'll do a couple of passes up and down that runway, just to clear the animals, the giraffe and things like that off it so that you can land. It does happen that either the game drive vehicle's a bit late or they have cleared the strip, but something else has wandered on after they've had a drive up and down. So your typical response in that scenario would be to sort of try and buzz the animal to just sort of scoot it off. But I once had this great experience where I arrived before the game drive vehicle got to the airfield.
Okay.
And I flew overhead and saw this family of giraffe. So I was sort of banking over them quite gently, and didn't really want to frighten them too much. I sort of did this for 10 minutes, and then the game drive vehicle ended up and shooed the animals off the runway, and then managed to land. And when I got out, the guest said to me, "Well, you can take us home now. We only came to see giraffes, and now you've shown us this family of giraffes up close in a way that we could never have imagined." Yeah. So it was things like that really made the job worthwhile.
Yeah, I know. And also, I can remember chatting with you through your experiences being there. There's obviously some hardships that come with being, you're not based at the lodge. You're not based at these fancy places. You're based in a sort of a large town, small city, Maun, and there's a bit of a buzz to it in terms of people in and out going on. But nothing necessarily spectacular about Maun. You've got some wonderful lodges that you're flying to. But those trips like that will make it special, and you'll think back fondly on like buzzing giraffes and guests being just so happy and appreciative of the kind of things that you can share with them. Okay, so now you park the aeroplane, you help the guests get out, etc. And I know there's some times where there might be a pickup again later, and there's some times where you'd leave the aircraft, you go to the lodge. Sometimes you overnight if it's late and an early start. And what are the kind of problems that you have seen now getting back to your aircraft? Because this is still a wildlife area. They don't care that it's a strip. Tell us about some of the sort of getting back into the airplane to head back to the city events.
Yeah, so I know it never happened to me, but I knew of people who'd come back to their aircraft after they tied them down because single cell thunderstorms roll through the Delta. It's a typical weather phenomenon, and they come back and have had their tires and things nibbled by typically hyenas and things like that. So what the procedure was then, if you were parking overnight, was sort of to lay thorn bushes that you could find, sort of dead bits of twig and stuff, just to build a barrier around your aircraft so that the animals wouldn't nibble your tires.
Oh man, that's fun. Yeah, okay, so there's some exciting adventures. It sounds like you really enjoyed your time in the bush, obviously with the ups and downs of being away, being on your own, but certainly great for confidence, great for your exposure, great for building as a pilot, and again, pilot in command. You're making all the decisions. You are in terms of being in the flight, but obviously there's a team, there's a support team on both on the lodge side and at the Maun side, and there's lots of communication with ops, lots of communication with other pilots, and also lots of shared learning that takes place. You get back home, it's a day operation only, get back home at the last bit of light, and you may have picked up some situation that you maybe want to debrief about, and your fellow pilots that are all there, this kind of band of brothers, as it were, sisters, and you can share their experiences, and they could share their experiences of a few weeks or months earlier, and kind of debrief and almost like a safety circle, talk through it. I mean, tell us about those kind of experiences of learning something new or figuring things out as you go and bouncing it off your colleagues when you get back.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That definitely was the case, and I found surprisingly very little judgment. I think because you have to do what you have to do at times to make the operation work, you can only make your best decisions with the information and the situation that you're given. So there was a lot of that, and there was a lot of, well, I did this, and sometimes if you had an issue, you could get on the radio and even talk it through while other pilots are flying their guests to other destinations. Obviously, neither your guests nor those guests would know what issue you had, You would just be talking to the pilots over the radio, but definitely there was a sense of everyone had everybody's back.
Oh, that's great. And then obviously, all good things come to an end. It's time to move on to bigger and better things. You spent about 18 months flying in the bush and getting great command experience. And moving on to bigger and better things, you ended up flying with Salenta, and but spending the next couple of years in and out of Africa. How many different countries did you operate in all out of Africa?
Oh gosh, I've never counted it up, but off the top of my head, you don't want to guess at least 10.
Okay,
up and down the east and west coast.
I know you've been to some interesting places like Somalia and those kind of places too on short contracts, and certainly from your perspective as well, you've as a lady pilot, not very well received in some of these places. There's almost a difference to either a male or a captain, and I remember some of those stories. But your time in Africa, you learned a lot, gained a lot, started building bigger airplanes on big established contracts, DHL, etc. But then there was an opportunity for you to now perhaps try something new, and Australia was calling. So talk us through the idea. Now you're a commercial pilot, South Africa, ATP, and now you're considering the option of moving to Australia. What's it like now to relocate as a pilot to Australia? I mean, do you just take your license, hand it in, they stamp it out, and there you go, you can fly in Australia now?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, no, you have to redo your ATP in a sense. So you have to rewrite a couple of the theory exams and redo the flight test. That's required for all the ATPs. So no, it's not just a rubber stamping exercise. You do have to go through the motions, and it's not cheap either. So you've got to think long and hard about whether you really want to do it. I came over and converted my South African ATPL to an Australian airline license. But then I took a segue into flying drones for a Boeing subsidiary called In Situ.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Let me put a picture up there of the Scan Eagle. There's a picture of the launcher. This Eagle is now getting airborne. There's an aerial. Talk us through then. Okay, so this was a job that you did for a little over a year, if I remember correctly. Talk us through that kind of a job. Is this, again, now you're a pilot, so we'll teach you how to fly a drone? Or what's the training like then to do something different like this?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't say that you necessarily need a pilot's license to fly remotely operated aircraft or UAVs, whatever you want to call them. The reason why the company I got a job with required you to have a license was because they were operating beyond visual line of sight. So you were operating the drone and the camera work, but you couldn't actually see the drone. That was sort of 50 kilometers away.
Okay.
And the authority requires you to have an instrument rating in order to do that.
Sure.
So that was sort of my segue into it. But yeah, it's kind of sort of tough, hard work because it's a sort of 20 to 22 kilogram fixed wing drone that you're carrying around. You've got to carry it from the sort of pre-flight bay to that launcher that you can see, and carrying it on your shoulders. So, and it's hot. I mean, it's plus 40 degrees out there.
Okay, I put the picture up, but there's obviously not you. There's a gentleman carrying it along. You can see it on his shoulder, and it's quite a serious wingspan. And that's a big looking machine. So if you're the pilot, are you carrying this thing around? It's your baby?
Yeah, so you would carry it, you would pre-flight it. It was battery powered, so you pre-flight it and check the batteries, refuel it, everything like that, sort of under a shade cloth, and then you'd have to sort of carry it out to the launcher. I guess maybe it was about 50 meters or so we were carrying it, but it's heavy work when it's 20 kilograms on your shoulders in 40-degree heat.
And what was the purpose of the job? I mean, so you flew this thing up to 50 kilometers out beyond visual range. What were we doing with the thing? What is the camera taking pictures of?
So that commercial contract was essentially driving Shell's safety numbers. They had a key performance indicator that required them to reduce the number of driving hours. So instead of having a maintenance inspector drive out to the wellhead and inspect the condition and the oil levels and things like that, we would just send the drone out and then just log any maintenance issues that required someone to go out and specifically rectify.
Okay, I see. All right. So really just making it a seamless operation and, you know, reducing traveling time. Okay, so then at the end of this, obviously it's a segue into Australia. It was a good first job for you to get involved, but not really what you want to keep doing. It's tough conditions, manual work. You even qualified yourself as the sort of technician on the drone to be able to sign it out and get it ready. But then there was an opportunity for you, and you have this ATPL, and now there's an opportunity on this sort of upstart or up and coming low-cost carrier, JetGo. And all it required of you was to just book your own ticket, book your own accommodation, pay for your own simulator. So you and your husband, Pete, invest the money and off you go to Europe to go and do your training, and walk us through that exercise.
Yeah, that was a foolish exercise. But the sim training was absolutely first class, and it was great. And I had a really good time in Zurich, being trained by Lufthansa training organization on the Embraers. Unfortunately, when we arrived back, newly minted with our ratings, the company folded. So we were both out of a job, which was just a tiny little bit stressful.
Sure.
But sort of, I guess these things always breed opportunities, and from that, I was given the opportunity to interview at Virgin Australia. And then I was successful in that interview and taken on as a cruise relief first officer on their 777s between Australia and Los Angeles.
Okay, cool. There's a nice picture of the 777, the white with the Virgin colors, the Virgin Australia. Great. So, I mean, a bit of a setback financially, and obviously, you know, for you feeling like you got the next job and you were at the same airline, it was going to be fun to be flying with your husband. It would be great. It didn't work out, but now you're flying a Boeing 777 in-flight relief, a common place to start for most international airlines, and so that's the position you find yourself in, and flying 777s. Wonderful. What is it like to be a long-haul pilot?
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic. Heavy metal is the way to go. Absolutely. Obviously, people will have seen in the news that we're under voluntary administration at the moment, which is I guess just a reality of where we are with the COVID-19. But I've been very fortunate in that I was asked to fly a repatriation flight to Hong Kong last week, and I'm doing a freight charter tomorrow to Los Angeles. So keeping the airline flying, I'm doing my best.
Do your bit for the COVID response. That's great. Okay, but now the story doesn't end there, and really one of the ways I'm just trying to highlight the different types of careers people could have in flying as well. So you've always been someone who just works that bit harder. I can remember even in high school, you know, first thing on a Friday afternoon, you'd sit down and get all the work done, get it out the way, the rest of the weekend's clear. Now, never one to sit around, you've now enrolled in a PhD. So tell us a bit about your PhD. I mean, 2 degrees and 2 ATPs and an RPV license, not enough for you? Let's do a PhD while we're at it.
Yeah, it's something that I've always wanted to do, and because of the way my job works at the moment, I work hard and then I have a few days off, so I have enough time to be able to give towards the PhD at the moment. I would like to tell you what it's about. In the words of Einstein, if I knew what it was I was doing, it wouldn't be called research. So I started out looking at reporting systems in aviation, and there's a problem of underreporting, and it's a well-known problem that issues, hazards, and incidents aren't identified and reported. And I wanted to dig deeper and find out what the mechanism was for that, how it worked, why it was that people don't report. But at the moment, I am looking at disasters in the sense that they occur in organizations that should have high reliability. So things like oil rigs, aviation accidents,
Sure.
Rail accidents, nuclear accidents, things like that. And I'm looking for commonalities between them.
Okay.
And as a first pass, I've discovered that essentially what it boils down to is in most of these high-profile accidents. You can think of Deepwater Horizon or Chernobyl,
Sure.
things like that. There's an element of drifting towards failure, as Decker puts it.
Yeah, great author, Sidney Decker.
For other people, he's well known. That's it. And there's a common element of that in almost every accident that I've looked at so far. So it's interesting.
Okay, so deep underway there with your research, and no doubt you're gonna do very well in that too. I have no doubt of that. Your work ethic is way up there. Well, good luck for the sort of the deep and heavy work through the PhD, and thank you for your contribution with the repatriation. I know tomorrow you're off on your flight. It's been wonderful chatting with you, Nick. I really appreciate your time and your availability to join the show. All the best with the PhD, all the best with the flying, and we'll chat again soon.
Thanks, Alex. Take care. Stay safe.
Cheers. Well, thanks, folks. Thanks for signing in. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Just remember, it's never too late. You can start in one career, you can jump around, and aviation is always an opportunity for you. Thanks again for supporting the show. Please like, subscribe, share. If you're not watching it in real time, come back and put a comment down below here. We can ask questions. We can keep the conversation alive after the video too. And I thank you for your support. Stay safe out there.